heard someone singing about a new wind coming to this town, and it sounded so simple and true, like a song I wanna sing for you. My, oh my, the moon is bright tonight. Come closer to me and curl up tight, and bring this boy some good news, and tell me that you love me too. Fate has a funny way to choose, leaving some folks to gain and some to lose. But I want me a taste of some good news, and I wanna sing it straight back to you. My, oh my, the moon is bright tonight. Come closer to me and curl up tight, and bring this boy some good news, and tell me that you love me too. My, oh my, the moon is bright tonight. Come closer to me and curl up tight, and bring this boy some good news, and tell me that you love me too.
Jesus told a parable. Once upon a time there was a man who had 2 sons. The older craved his father's approval. The younger had a different agenda. The older stayed home. The younger went out and wasted his whole birthright, then came dragging back home. And how did the older brother react to that? He should have been glad. He ought to have been happy, but he wasn't. And the Jewish listeners say to themselves, a different angle on an old story. To review, a man named Adam had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Cain, the firstborn, showed God the fruit and grain he grew, but God preferred Abel's gift of meat, and Cain was crushed. His thoughts began to creep toward removing the source of his suffering, which he believed to be Abel. God said to Cain, "Cain, if you will, you can master this terrible idea." But Cain willed otherwise. A man named Abraham had 2 sons. Abraham cherished his firstborn, Ishmael. For Ishmael, everything was roses, roses, roses. Then, when Ishmael was 13, that little brat Isaac was born, and Ishmael made his negative feelings too plain and got himself and his mother thrown out of the family. A man named Isaac had 2 sons, fraternal twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau was secure in his birthright as firstborn, even if only by a minute or 2, and he lived for the moment, and Isaac preferred him to Jacob. Jacob, the younger, if only by a minute or 2, was less secure and more clever. When Jesus tells his parable of a man who had 2 sons, these other stories come to mind, and they call to mind all the wonder and hurt of being human. We tend to want to read the Bible as a book of moral lessons. It's really about something else, God's will and how people choose to respond. It's about God, yes, and it's also about messy human life. Its value is not just as a religious book, but as a mirror. What does it mean in all its glory and tragedy to be human? And so a parable does its work, not so much by delivering moral judgments as by describing the actions of its characters and letting that speak for itself. Here's this week's parable of two sons. Genesis chapter 25, starting in verse 19. Listen. And this is the lineage of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took as wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, from Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. And Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife, for she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And so, once again, as with Abraham and Sarah, we're sharing the deep disappointment of the promise of a child, then a wife unable to conceive, and not just any wife, but supposedly the mother of a nation. Even Rebekah's own family, who worshiped their own gods, had sent her off with a prayer that she would become myriad, mother of multitudes. Yet, once again, the natural chain of procreation interrupted. And someone prays, and God steps in at last, and we wonder, are the empty arms and the months dragging on and the years racing by, the chaos of faith undone, the wondering of a wife if she's loved anyway? Is it a test? The way we grow best? The age-old invitation to choose your response, for sure. For me, it's kind of like when the existential dread of this pandemic and all the ugliness it's ripped open gets bad, and then a hawk swoops down into my Chinese elm, and I say, "Oh, you darling, it's you." And I'm smiling again, and something has shifted, just enough to keep me steady as she goes. So here we have Rebekah, Rivkah in Hebrew, a young beauty who's left everything she knows, except the beloved nurse of her childhood, to marry a man she's never met. And yes, she knew by the load of jewelry that she would be well cared for. And yes, the transaction did turn into love. But still, I would say at this point that Rivkah never was much of a tender, retiring flower. Back on her home turf, she was out there, extending hospitality, hoisting jugs of water for camels, no less, and we know camels get very thirsty. She was brisk and enterprising, active and assertive, a capable organizer of her household when she got one. We are left to imagine her disappointment of 20 years with no child, but still she was strong, perhaps even tall of stature. Did you know that taller women are more likely to conceive twins? Did you know the chances a woman will have twins are twice at 35 what they were at 25? If Rivkah married at, say, 15, she's now, guess what, 35. The story continues. And the children clashed together within her, and she said, "Then why me?" And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations in your womb, two peoples from your loins shall issue. People over people shall prevail, the elder the younger's slave." So now Rivkah knows what all the hullabaloo is about. It's twins. It's the ominous, auspicious uncommonness of twins. It's the concentration of the power struggle, the intense rivalry that motivates and plagues us since Eden. It's the good angel on one shoulder and the mischief maker on the other. It's the hostility between brothers, or even the conflict in one soul between selfishness and compassion, all happening in poor Rivkah's womb, and still no answer to her question, "Why me?" The story continues, and when her time was come to give birth, Look, there were twins in her womb, and the first one came out ruddy, like a hairy mantle all over, and they called his name Esau. Then his brother came out, his hand grasping Esau's heel, and they called his name Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. Ah, so Isaac was 40 when he married Rivkah, 60 when the babies were born, with the delayed exposition of the Hebrew storytellers who tell you what they want you to know when they want you to know. This is the first we know that Rivkah was barren for 20 years. Like any brothers, these two share 50% of their DNA. There is surely some overlap of qualities, but these two as different as night and day. Jacob, heel grabber. What is the birthright of the firstborn that Jacob wanted so much that he would try to pull Esau back in and come out first? Well, in that day, the firstborn will be patriarch, with first call on all the stuff that people need to live. Ordinarily, the secondborn will live on the bounty and good will of the first. So, the story continues. And the lads grew up, and Esau was a man skilled in hunting, a man of the field, and Jacob was a simple man, a dweller in tents. And Isaac loved Esau for the game that he brought him, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Oh dear. Isaac favors Esau the firstborn, the hairy, manly outdoorsman. We are told he likes the meat that Esau brings home from the field. Rebekah, Rivkah, favors Jacob, who prefers the domestic sphere, the stories and wisdom passed down among the tents. And who's to say which way of being in the world is better, Esau's or Jacob's? I love what Frederick Buechner says. The place God wants you to be is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. But obviously something deeper than different vocations is going on. Esau is the firstborn. When Isaac dies, Esau will take his place as patriarch, ruler of the clan, heir of Abraham's covenant with God. Now remember what God told Rivkah in her prenatal vision, that the elder would serve the younger. But so far it doesn't look that way. So I'm afraid Rivkah is working behind the scenes, stirring up Jacob to make his move. What we'd dearly like to know is how willing Jacob was to go along with his mother's ambition. But we don't. All we know is that he was patient and clever. All we know is what he does. Listen. And Jacob prepared a stew, and Esau came from the field, and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me gulp down some of this red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore is his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell now your birthright to me." And Esau said, "Look, I am at the point of death, so why do I need a birthright?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me now." And he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate, and he drank, and he rose, and he went off. And Esau spurned the birthright. Thus ends chapter 25. So interesting. Esau famished, impetuous, impatient. He cared little for words, couldn't even think of the word for stew. He just wanted some of that red stuff. And he gulped it down. a word reserved in Hebrew for the feeding of animals. He gulped it down, he ate and he drank, and he rose and he left, just like that. And Jacob, oh so carefully positioned and calculating. Jacob gets the birthright, and then in chapter 27 he goes after the blessing. And his moral ambiguity will pursue him, for sure.